Hello and welcome to the Caslalgy Digital Marketing Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about get their attention. Obviously looking at your customers and prospective clients and working out how we can get their attention. In the podcast series, I talked to a number of industry experts and people who know what they're talking about. Hopefully they can bring their industry knowledge and information and give you good examples of it. Today, we're lucky to have as a guest Ian Brodie. I'm going to bring Ian in and then I'll do a short introduction.
Strategy, market research, email, marketing plan,
display ads,
PPC, content, social media, social ads, SEO. Welcome to the Caslalgy Digital Marketing Podcast.
Hello, Ian. If I've got this right, you should be able to hear me and I can see each other.
I can. Fantastic.
So thank you very much for joining us today. I've just been telling the guys that you're here to talk to us about getting the customer's attention. I'm going to give you a quick brief introduction before you do so. So for those of you who don't know Ian, I'll be surprised if you don't, but yeah, for those of you who don't know Ian is obviously Ian Brodie. He's a host of Course Builders TV. He's also the author of Email Persuasion. I think in his earlier days, I think he's actually got a degree in maths, which kind of makes a lot of people cringe. Makes me cringe. I mean, it's one of those things you did, but I didn't really like it. And you're also an MBA at from Manchester University as well, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, a long time ago, 94, I think I graduated. So
yeah,
it was a lot easier in those days, a lot less to learn.
No. I think, and then I read. I was doing some reading up, and I think you were like pretty much. What's a nice way to say it? It's like gallivanting across the globe, cutting $1 million deals for breakfast, and I kind of had visions of you in a private jet smoking cigars and stuff. And I was like, wow,
I never quite did the private jet, but I did a lot of travel. I think I worked out. I've worked in 17 different countries. I traveled for about a dozen or so years, working for some big consulting firms, and I think I worked in 17 different countries during those years. And yeah, did some very, very big projects and some little ones too. So a nice variety.
Oh, good stuff. Yeah, I think when I was reading up on this, I just thought you've obviously got I suppose the theory, if you like. Obviously, within an MBA, marketing's covered, and for anyone who's researched an MBA, there's a lot to it. So you've got, I suppose, the theory. You've done the practice at the highest possible level, and then I suppose home is where the heart is. I suppose you're back here in Manchester, and obviously doing what you're doing. Was, I think when I first met you, I think you were still. When I say still, but you are. But I think because I've got to know you and connected with you, it kind of brings down the barriers a little bit. But you were like that big superstar, like one of those digital marketing rock stars. Because I think I went to an event at Old Trafford in Manchester, the cricket ground, and they had like, I forget the name of it. It was this huge social media event. Literally people from across the globe. There were some local people as well. I think there was the likes of yourself. There was Ian Anderson Gray. I think Sam Flynn. I think the Facebook expert Marie Smith, and there was loads. I think that John Ashcroft hosted it. I mean, am I on the right lines?
I was there. Yeah, I still have the video of me speaking on the stage. That was a load of fun. It was a huge event, possibly the biggest stage I've spoken on, because you could walk from one end of the stage to the other, and it would take you about 10 minutes.
No, absolutely. Because it was like what they call cabaret style tables, but there must have been at least 50 tables. I mean, there was, I think maybe I don't want to say 1,000, but there was hundreds of people there. Definitely,
it was something like that. Yeah.
There was huge.
It was certainly that. If I remember at the time, it was the biggest event the UK had in marketing for a long time. So certainly digital online marketing.
Yeah, and it was probably one of the best events I went to be honest. I mean, it was a paid event, so you kind of hope to get a lot of value out of it, but I think it was a really, really good event. And I think just going back to what I was saying, that was when I obviously first met you, and you kind of, I think you were talking about email on the day, and I was like, yeah, I'm a digital marketer, I know what email is. Yeah, thanks very much. But you kind of opened my eyes to, I was like, oh right, because I was at that time very focused on social media, because obviously we'd been through that. I think in 2010, I'd set up an organization, used social media, and because obviously it was a new thing in them days, wasn't it? Because you could get organic reach was fantastic. You didn't really need to use paid ads. It was good. That's great to do the social media, but we're missing an opportunity here. We should be capturing that data and emailing these people again, which is kind of, I suppose, that retention or retainer element of the funnel. Do you know, where you towards the bottom of the funnel, And even though it sounds obvious, when you said it, I was like, well, we're doing all this hard work on social media, trying to connect with people, trying to engage with them every day. I think you may have suggested this, like some sort of email sequencing or some landing page or somewhere to direct people to capture their information. And then you talked about how it's already built trust and stuff. I mean, I could probably do the whole podcast of what you talked about that day. But
I think the interesting thing, I was going to say, the interesting thing for me back then was I really knew when I was on stage that email was the boring part of the agenda, because everyone was there for the socials, for the Facebook and LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. But what I was luckily able to do was I went to the web pages of all the other speakers. So the kind of Mary Smiths, etc., the big Facebook queen, and looked at their websites. And what was the number one thing on Mary Smith's website? Put your email address in. And it was the same for all the other big speakers for Pinterest and LinkedIn and whatever. Their websites were all focused on email. So luckily I was able to get people's attention, I think, by surprising them a little about how much all these great social media speakers actually focused on email. So that was interesting.
I think that was it. It was almost like doing that "you had me at hello" kind of moment, because you're right. Because email was like, at that time, I mean, it's probably even more important now, I suppose. But at that time, you're right to say there was a huge focus on social media, and it was all about which channels to be on. And then you kind of just almost like, it was almost like, keep it simple, silly. Like, it's dead easy. Do this, get their email, and you've got customers for life. And it was like, oh wow, why didn't we think of this earlier, kind of thing. But yeah, so but I mean, I suppose what we're going to be talking about today is obviously, I suppose the title is get their attention, and I suppose you've moved, well, not moved. I suppose now you're looking at both ends of the funnel. Obviously, email is towards the bottom of the funnel. I mean, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of the word funnel. I like to use the word process, and I understand it, but I think the word funnel, I just can't get on board with it just yet. I mean, I use it in all my talks because people understand it, but yeah. So you were towards the bottom of the funnel, where we're talking about retention and obviously retaining customers. Now, get their attention is probably, I'm tempted to say, the most important part. Both of us will know our theory, and obviously market research is important, but when the game starts or when the ball's kicked off, it's all about getting the customer's attention, because if you can't get their attention, you can't get their email anyway, so you might as well forget that. That's a long way away. But I mean, I suppose I'm right there in terms of saying that we're right at the top of the funnel then, aren't we?
Yeah, but it's also all the way through. I think that's the nice thing about attention, is you can use the lessons learned of attention throughout every piece of your marketing. Because if you think about it, you're absolutely right. You've got to get people's attention in the first place. If you can't get someone's attention, then all the, no matter how great you are at marketing, no matter how persuasive you are, or influential or clever or creative, if no one's paying any attention to you, it's not going to, you're just shouting in the dark. You're like the tree that falls in the forest, that kind of thing. So you absolutely need people's attention to do anything in marketing. And a lot of that you might be thinking about that it's about getting it in the first place. But what the scientists, I guess, have found, and because there's been a lot of research, is that there's been big advances in kind of psychology and neuroscience in recent years because of things like imaging, where they can see what's going on in the brain now. So they can be a bit more scientific about what's actually happening. And one of the things they've discovered, and there's by no means a consensus about this, but just to give you a kind of simplified view, there are kind of three levels of attention, if you think about it. And the first is what you might call immediate attention. And that's the kind of attention you get. Imagine you're walking down the street and somebody shouts behind you, and you're immediately, of course, going to turn around just to see what it is.
Absolutely.
So that's someone grabbing your attention. And that's the same thing about in marketing, where you're kind of trying to grab someone's attention in the first place. But that's not enough, because you'll know if you're walking down the street and you hear a shout and you turn around, let's say it's just a mother shouting at a child, you're just going to immediately turn around and start ignoring them and walk on. And obviously that's not what you want in your marketing. You want more attention than that. So that first stage is necessary, because if you don't grab their attention in the first place, you're nowhere, but it's just a start. So that's kind of immediate attention. The next level is what they call short attention. So imagine if you're on the street and you turned around, if it's the mother shouting at a kid, you start ignoring it. But if it's someone shouting your name, then you pay a bit more attention. Then you go, oh, well, what are they shouting about? Or someone shouting at you, then you kind of start paying a bit more attention. So that's short attention, where they grab it, it's very fleeting, but then you go, oh, hang on, maybe I should be putting a bit more into this. Maybe I should look at this or listen to this to see what it is. So that's immediate and short attention. And then the big one, if you like, is long attention. And this is where people keep coming back for more. So where you voluntarily give your attention to something. So for example, if you've got a favorite TV show, and you tune in every week to watch it, you are choosing to give your attention to that TV show. They didn't have to shout. They may have shouted at you in the first place by putting an advert on in the middle of a different show. So you go, oh, that looks interesting. I'll go and watch that. But once they've got you hooked, and we can talk about this kind of getting hooked a bit later, once they've got you hooked, you keep coming back for more. Or an email newsletter that you really like, that you look out for when it comes into your inbox, and you'll always try and read. That's long attention. And that's kind of like the most valuable bit, because people are coming back for more. But it starts with the immediate, then you've got to get the short, and then it turns into kind of long attention over time. So those are kind of like the three different types. So as I say, they do fit well throughout the whole marketing process.
I think once again, you've simplified it, and you're absolutely right, because yes, we need to get their attention right at the start, and it kind of makes me think about the eight, I suppose, in marketing, the AIDA model. You've got like the attention, the interest, the desire, then the action, and I suppose we're probably towards the top, or not the top end of that, but we're kind of looking at a number of those. But what you're right, because if I get someone's attention, okay, that's great. What happens next? If I send them an email, are they going to be interested or not? So yeah, we need to get their attention. But I think when someone sends an email or puts a social media post out, even to people who they've spoke to or they're engaged with or are part of their emailing list, you still need to get their attention again on that email.
Yes.
The people say to make it pop, make it stand out, make sure you get their attention with the email. So.
And I think that that's a really important point, because these days, that's why attention is so important. It's always been important, because if you've never had attention, you've never been able to do anything in marketing. But these days, of course, there's so much more noise than there ever used to be. So you're competing for attention with the TV, with Facebook, with YouTube, with the dog, with their kids, people have only got so much attention they can, and there are more things competing for it. So you need to work harder these days to get that attention, and then as you were saying, someone might have been interested enough to sign up for your emails. They might have read your first couple, but the next time your email drops in their inbox, you still have to get their attention again. You've got a head start, because they may notice your name on the email and go, oh yeah, so that's where the long attention comes in. It gives you a head start, really. But your subject line, for example, still has to be something interesting, because if they see your name, oh, Ian, he writes good emails. But if they see the subject line and say, oh, that looks really dull, they're not going to open it. They haven't got enough time. So you have to kind of win attention again every time.
Yeah, and I think the example you gave with your favorite TV show is like no one needs to remind you. Like if you're watching something on Netflix or BBC iPlayer, or like when Peaky Blinders is coming out or whatever it might be, we already know when it's coming out, and it's almost like the Netflix, they don't need to remind us again. They've got us so bought into this that we're voluntarily, like you said, taking time out of our own lives to go find them, rather than them sending. I'm sure there'll be like an email reminder or something, but you're almost looking at it to say, well, yeah, of course I know about this. You don't need to email me about this.
Well, you know what the TV people are really good at? We're kind of jumping ahead a bit and starting with long attention, but that's all right, because it's a really important point. And there was actually some data released, I think it was like almost 10 years ago now, from Netflix. So Netflix not doing as well now as they used to, but they were the absolute masters of keeping people's attention. And they used to chart how long it took for people to get hooked by certain shows. So what they would do was they'd measure how many shows people were watching. So they look at viewing figures. And then for those same people, because with a Netflix subscription, they know what you're watching. For those same people, they would see how many episodes you needed to watch before you became hooked and you watched the entire season. And they would then plot that out for different TV shows. So I think they found, for example, that shows like kind of How I Met Your Mother or Mad Men would take about 5, 6, 7 episodes. And if you watched 5, 6, or 7 episodes of those shows, then there was like an 80% chance you'd watch the whole series. They found with Breaking Bad, it was averaging about 1.5. If you watched 1 or 2 episodes of Breaking Bad, you were hooked for the entire series. You almost always watched the entire series. So obviously then when they started making films with all this data, making more series, they were trying to bring what they called that hook point earlier and earlier, because obviously if it takes 5 or 6 episodes before someone gets hooked, a lot of them are going to leave, and the viewing figures are kind of go down for a series. But if you can hook people earlier, your viewing figures are going to be like that and really high for the whole series. So they've looked more and more at what do we need to do to really, get people hooked in at that very first episode or the second episode, so they stay tuned for the whole thing. And sometimes you'll see, for example, a common tactic, if they know, for example, that it takes a couple of episodes before you get hooked, is they release the first 2 episodes so to give you enough time. So that's why they do, 1 or 2 episodes for a new series at once. It's to try and get you hooked so you'll stay for the rest. But it's almost a science for them now to try and get people hooked earlier and earlier.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on to the earlier part of the funnel because I've got a good example. But what you've just mentioned about the 2 episodes is really important because there's a program quite a while back now I wanted to watch, and they said, the pilot episode's out, and then I think I checked not the TV guide, but I just checked on Sky to see how long it's on for, and it said pilot, and then it said episode 2 straight after it, and I was like, oh God, that's great. I can watch 2 episodes together because I was really looking forward to it. Just like you said, they put the pilot together with this. Well, basically, they put 2 episodes together, enough to get me hooked because I'm looking forward to it anyway. And they're thinking, right, okay, he'll want to watch that. He'll be really interested. Put the second one straight on, and then we've got him in that first 2 episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
And after that, they had me then, and I probably watched till series 10 or whatever it was. But that was really, really good because I think the way you mentioned it.
Smart thinking by them, and there's some other. We'll come back and we'll mention some other things they do to try and get that to happen, and how you can apply that obviously to your own marketing. Marketing is important.
True. Okay, then. So I suppose if we go back to the start in terms of it getting your attention, just so we can go things, because obviously to get to that point, they need to do something really good, exciting, and I suppose we'll come up with other examples. But even in the Netflix example, but as soon as you put Netflix on, they always have like a show at the very top, and they have basically 60 seconds they show you to basically get our attention. And they've got obviously must be a series of maybe some 10 seasons in some, or maybe a film that's 2 hours long, or maybe even it's 5 seasons. But they've got to limit that whole thing down to 60 seconds to get my attention.
Yeah.
How do they choose that? What do they do?
Well, they're doing 2 things there. They're doing 2 things there. They're playing on 2 things. Now, obviously, they are the masters at it, and there's some other stuff they're doing. But at simple levels, they're doing both immediate and short attention. So the immediate attention is trying to get your eyeballs for 10 seconds. And then the short attention is using that 10 seconds and then the rest of the minute to get you to get interested in it. And there are a couple of different drivers for both of those. So the good way of thinking about short attention, a bit like on the street, immediate attention, a bit like on the street where you force someone's head to turn. This very first thing, it's a little bit easier for like Netflix because you've already switched on and the ad is in front of you. Whereas, for example, if you're trying to do it with a social media post, people are probably scrolling through really quickly through their feed, and you've got to get something that grabs them. And the thing that tends to grab people's attention is contrast or difference. That's what we notice. And we're kind of hardwired to notice that. It goes back to evolutionary days where we kind of, emerged from the caves. We're on the kind of savanna plains. We're fighting for survival. Those of our ancestors that noticed that the kind of orange and black striped creature with big teeth emerging from the jungle looked a bit different to the lovely green leafy stuff and the nice fuzzy cows. The people who noticed they were different and ran away survived, and our ancestors who didn't notice the difference got eaten. Well, they're not our ancestors, are they? They were eaten instead. So we are kind of hardwired from an evolutionary perspective to spot difference, because difference usually means danger. Something unusual happens, you've got to pay attention to it to see if it's something dangerous. And we still do that. So, for example, on a social media feed, it's usually the image that captures your attention. And if you want to grab someone's attention on Facebook or LinkedIn or something, use an image that contrasts to what they're normally going to see. So to give you an example of that, we're just running some Facebook ads for my wife's business at the minute, and she works with people in early years. So people who are like nursery teachers and stuff like that. And we tried a variety of different images. Now, what I thought would work was a nice picture of a kind of baby or something like that, a really cutesy baby. And they go, oh, lovely cutesy baby. Yeah. And we tried that. And what worked much better was a cartoon image of some kids with speech bubbles. And thinking about it, the reason it worked was people who work in nurseries who look after young kids, their Facebook feeds are filled with pictures of babies. So our image just disappeared. It was invisible almost, because it just looked like all the other images they were seeing from all the other nursery folks who, oh, look at this cutesy baby, oh, look at this, whatever, or maybe stuff to do with work that has images of young children on it. Because ours was a cartoon, if you look at their feeds, it really stands out. So they went, oh, what's that? And that was enough to then get them to read, oh, there's a free summit going on with, some great speakers, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that kind of grabbed them, the contrast. Another good example is a guy I really like, is a branding consultant called Dragos Balashoyu. Difficult to pronounce his name.
Can you spell it? I'm joking.
I can't. No, it's B-A-L. Dragos is D-R-A-G-O-S, but I cannot spell Balashoyu. There's no H in it, but that's how you say it. And he posts on LinkedIn a lot about branding and stuff like that. And his posts on LinkedIn are almost always kind of memes. So there'll be an animated GIF, an animated GIF, but it'll be like a little scene from a comedy show where someone slaps the head, or with those, the white wording that comes over and says something funny. And to one degree, you kind of go, oh, well, that's not very professional. It's LinkedIn and whatever. But the main thing is, people notice, because all the other images you're scrolling through on LinkedIn are really boring. They're work related. It's some people at a meeting. It's stock photos. And you scroll past, and Dragos is like Elaine from Friends going, or whatever. So you go, oh, what's that? And you then read what he's, the first couple of lines of what he's written. Now, absolutely, you can't just use clickbait and get people to look at it and then say something rubbish. So Dragos's posts are really good. They're really insightful, full of value, but you can write a really insightful, full of value post and no one notices it because it just looks the same as everyone else's. So that's the key to immediate attention, is to do something that looks different to everyone else's. And I'll tell you another good example of that is if you're going to email someone, let's say you're thinking, I'm going to cold email someone I don't know to ask if they would like to talk about X, Y, and Z. The trouble is, people get 1 million cold emails in their inbox all the time, and they largely ignore them because they all look at everyone else's. So you can actually do scales of doing something better. So, firstly, the first thing to think about is, can I do a subject line that looks a bit different? Use an emoji or something like that. And they do work. It feels a bit unprofessional, but an emoji works because it looks different on the subject line. Another thing to do is use humor in your cold email. And possibly the only cold email I've ever responded to in the last 5 years, other than to say no, go away, is one that was a funny story. It was actually very amusing as to how the guy came to email me. So I actually wrote back and said, I'm not interested, but I'm keeping you in mind because that was really interesting. Next step up, maybe send a video email, because again, that's going to be different to what everyone else is going to be getting. But even better, don't send an email at all. How about send them the letter through the post? If you're talking about cold emailing a high value client, they get loads of emails, they get less posts. People get very little posts these days of actual letters that people have written. So handwrite a letter or send a parcel. A client of mine does this wonderfully with them. She uses very bright silver envelopes. They usually use them to send technology in. And she'll send a letter and a couple of bits of collateral in there. And when someone gets a bright silver envelope through the post, they're not going to put it to one side like they do with an email and ignore it. They're going to go, what's this? Oh, and I'll open it. And that's because it's a huge contrast, not only to the emails they're getting, it's a contrast to everything else they're getting in the post. So contrast really works to get people's attention.
Okay.
But then coming back to what you're saying, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, going back to what you were saying about, Netflix doing the little trailer. Yeah. So what they might do to get in for that immediate attention is to use a very flashy image. An image that looks, the initial image is looking very different to what you were about to watch anyway. So you go, oh, what was that? Otherwise, let's say you tune in to watch Game of Thrones and they're trying to advertise something different. If what they're advertising looks just like Game of Thrones, your eyes are just going to assume it's Game of Thrones, and you're not going to pay, you're going to be warming up to watching, it's the credits or whatever. But if instead it's like a bold color or a cartoon or sci-fi or an explosion or something, you're going to go, oh, what's that? And you're going to give that immediate attention. They've then maybe got a minute. I don't know how much it is with, on TV, but you got a short amount of time to then go a bit deeper with short attention. And the thing that drives short attention is curiosity, because and this applies to almost everything, but the place I learned it from was emails. And it was a copywriter called Gary Bencivenga, who was possibly the world's most successful copywriter back in the day. And he had this formula for subject lines, which is the interest is benefits times curiosity. So everybody knows about benefits. You've got to write about something that people will get value from. But he said, but that's no use. If you write an email subject line, people think talking about what you're going to have in the email, or an advert with a headline. And if people think they've already seen it, it doesn't matter how beneficial it is. they're not going to bother because they think they already know it. So you've got to arouse their curiosity somehow. So with a great example, if we go to the media of that, have you seen the Deadpool film, the first ever Deadpool?
No, I've not seen it.
Okay,
I've seen the memes.
I'm a bit sad because I used to read comic books when I was a kid, so I watched Deadpool. The very first few seconds, the problem with comic book films, and I used to watch all the comic book films right from the 70s, the very first Spider-Man, like before they even had special effects. And the problem with all of them, up until about the maybe 90s, 2000s, was they were all dead boring because they all started with like Spider-Man. Here's Spider-Man. It's Peter Parker. He's a beat-up little kid. And then he gets bitten by a radioactive spider. And then it's about half an hour in before any action happens. And the problem with that is, if you already know Spider-Man, you know that story anyway. If you don't know Spider-Man, you're bored for half an hour as they're setting it up and doing his origin.
Yeah.
So with Deadpool and most films these days, they didn't do that. They started off, they still had to do his origin, but the way they started off the film was in the middle of a fight scene, and it's Deadpool kind of trying to half climb out of a rolling car in the air to try and shoot someone as their bodies flying everywhere. It's in slow motion. You watch that, the minute you switch it on, you go, what on earth is that? I have no idea what's going on here, but I'm interested because it got you curious. And then they resolve that scene, the fight scene comes over, somebody gets stabbed or whatever, lots of people die, explosion everywhere, and then it cuts back like 6 months earlier. Here's how Deadpool. But now you're interested enough that you're willing to watch. Oh, I wonder how he got those powers. You're watching. But if they just started off with, here's this ordinary guy and we're not really very interested, and you would give up, most people.
No. That's a good example.
And so they call that, they use that a lot in TV, and they call it the cold open. So often TV shows, instead of starting with the theme tune and whatever, they'll open. Saturday Night Live in America is famous for it. They'll open with a joke. They'll open with the guest performer telling the big joke to make you, oh, that was good, I'll stay for the rest of the show. And then they play the theme music and stuff like that. Or some podcasts, for example, instead of opening with the theme music of the podcast and stuff, they'll open with a clip from the podcast that's really interesting to get you intrigued. Or they'll just say, on this week's show, you're going to learn about A, B, and C straight away. And then they do the theme music and all that kind of stuff. But they want to get your interest early on. So that's really important to grab people's interest. And when you're doing marketing, you can do it think about more traditional marketing for us. You can do it in lots of different ways. So there's a really great, one of the most successful adverts in history is the "Do You Make These Mistakes in English" advert, which was a newspaper ad. I think it was a show in Cody's School of English or something by Max Sackheim, 1940, something like that. And it ran for about 30 years. It was so successful. And the headline of the advert had some guy's face, and it said, "Do you make these mistakes in English?" And if you read that and I remember seeing that in the kind of Sunday newspapers when I was a kid. And the first thing you think is, when you read, "Do you make these mistakes in English?" you go, what mistakes? And then you start reading the rest of the text to see what those mistakes are, to see if you read them. So it was all about curiosity. And you can use the exact same thing yourself. You can have an email subject line, saying, "Do you make these five business crushing mistakes?" And people go, "What 5 mistakes?" Now, if he just said, "Do you make mistakes in English?" the answer is either yes or no. And that's like, no more interest. But if you say, "Do you make these mistakes in English?" then you go, "Oh, I wonder what they are." And you dive in.
Yeah, but I mean, I was going to say, what you were just saying regarding where they show the cold open, you see it like sometimes like, you'll see like a dessert on Facebook, you're on the news feed, and they've just taken the dessert out and what to put it into a plate for about 3 or 4 seconds. And then they'll cut to the start of how they're getting the ingredients together. Had they cut to the ingredients first, I would have been like, I can't be bothered watching this. I don't even know.
I can't be bothered watching that. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. You know what the interesting bit is at the end. They often say with writing, you after you've written an email or written something, cut out the first couple of paragraphs because they're usually fluff, and you get to the meat later on. Great example is TV shows again. My wife's a big fan of like CSI and all those, and very often they'll do an episode where they open, and again, no credits, they'll open, and it's like Horatio out of CSI Miami with his hands up being arrested. And they go, "Put your gun down, sir," and whatever. And you think, well, why are they arresting Horatio? He's the hero. What on earth's happened? And then they'll go 3 days previously, and they'll start replaying. Whereas again, if they start with a slow build-up, people are going to leave because it's just not interesting enough early on. But again, you can do stuff like that in your marketing by again starting. If you're writing an email, so the first paragraph of the subject line is where you're kind of grabbing their attention. The first paragraph that needs to be good to get them to read the whole email. So start in the middle of the story. So instead of starting by 17 years ago, start by saying it was cold, it was dark, I'd lost my phone, I was worried, I was going to die. ... And people going, what's going on? If you start in the middle of the story, people are more interested, and then you track back. Let me tell you how I got there. 17 years ago, I was, and then cover the rest. But don't do the big exposition. And lots of other techniques you can use as well. One of my favorite techniques is the German phrase Schadenfreude. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, which is people are curious about bad things that have happened to you. So one of my most successful emails ever was just entitled "My Worst Sales Meeting Ever." Now, obviously, there's some benefit in people reading about your worst sales meeting because hopefully there are some lessons learned in there about how to have a good sales meeting. But really, what people are going, ooh, I wonder
you're thinking, what on earth did he do?
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to see about Ian's worst sales meeting or whatever. And they're nice as well because you're humanizing yourself by admitting your mistakes as well. But it's that Schadenfreude. So I've done my worst sales meeting ever, my worst email ever, my big marketing disaster. All of those get a much higher open rate than normal emails because people are going, ooh, that's interesting. Well, so you can just play about with techniques.
So just on that, what we've been talking about is either the cold open or something to get their attention. But you mentioned a very key word before, clickbait. How do we differentiate as marketers, I suppose, as business owners, as people trying to help, as marketing executives? How do we differentiate from the clickbait from trying to get their attention? Like you say, there's a fine line because people say, oh, just use a cat video. And I'm like, well, what's that got to do with that? So how do we differentiate from getting someone's attention and between that and clickbait?
I think there are two things, really. I think the first is that it has to be relevant to your business goals. So, a cat video, great, you can get someone to watch a cat video, but how does that further your relationship with that potential customer or make them think you're an expert at what you do or make them think your product's great? Probably not. Probably not. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a little funny meme in the middle of an email, for example, just to lighten the mood, but you've got to deliver some value in there that's going to further your business goals. And the other thing is you've got to deliver on your promises. I think a lot of the problem with clickbait is, it'll say, I remember clicking on something like, the stars of Happy Days, the stars of Cheers in the 90s. You won't believe what they look like now.
Yeah.
And I went, oh dear, I wonder what, and sadly I did click and I looked like, you know what? I do believe what they look like now because they just look like older versions of what they used to. So it didn't, it used the clickbait phrase, you won't believe at what they look like now. And it let me down because they look perfectly normal. So if you use any phrase you use to get people's attention, anything you do to get people's attention, you've got to deliver on the promise. So for example, do you make these mistakes in English? You've got to tell them in the body copy what those mistakes are. And they have to be genuine mistakes that people often make. If you write an email with a subject line, do you make these 5 killer copywriting mistakes? They've got to be 5 killer copywriting mistakes in that email. Otherwise, it's just clickbait. A good example is years ago when social media was just first becoming prominent, I got an email from someone doing one of those big product launches and it said, social media doesn't work. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I'll click and read that email. And the first paragraph of the email went, social media doesn't work in capital letters, ... unless you do it right. And it's like, oh, for God's sake. Well, look, nothing works if you don't do it right. You've let me down because you haven't delivered on the promise. I want, if you said social media doesn't work, you've got to give me at least a good reason or situation when social media doesn't work. Not just say if you don't do it right, that's just feeble. So I think that's the main thing to avoid being clickbait. If you can deliver on the promise, then it's not clickbait. Now that might mean when you've written it, you might have to go back and tone down your promise if you've been too bold in what you were kind of promising in the subject line, or it may mean you really can deliver on, my worst sales meeting ever. I really did tell them about my worst sales meeting ever, and it was horrible. So, and there was plenty for them to learn from that. It's nice if it can be surprising as well. So, for example, in the email, my worst sales meeting ever, the tip wasn't about how to have better sales meetings. The real tip was I should not have had that meeting at all, because if I'd done my homework, I would have known the guy wasn't interested. So if you can give some kind of surprise in there as well, some learning they weren't expecting, then they feel satisfied. It's like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, I've read it and I've learned something new. You know, if I've learned something good and new that matches up with what I heard in the headline or the subject line, then it's all good. Then it's all good and it's not clickbait.
I mean, that's really clever because there's quite a lot going on there. So, I mean, just to use the example again of your worst meeting ever, I'm expecting to find out what you did in that meeting, what was the worst thing ever. And then, one, because there might be a humor involved in there and I can maybe relate to it. Two, there might be things I make sure I don't do again and do myself in the future. And three, the surprise element would be the one that you mentioned where it's the unexpected bit of it. Like you would have said, in the end, I wish I'd not taken the meeting in the first place. So I've got quite a few
exactly
learnings.
So that's exactly it. I mean, that is pretty much the email. It was basically, I told the story of this worst sales meeting, which is where basically the guy just didn't speak. Essentially, it had been set up as, oh, Ian, you're the expert. You speak to this guy. He just basically nothing. All the great sales techniques I was using didn't work. He went, yeah. So there was the story of it, and then there was a couple of lessons in terms of what I could maybe have done differently was X, Y, and Z. And then there was the but the real lesson was I shouldn't have been in the room with that guy in the first place. He wasn't a genuine prospect. My big mistake was X, Y, and Z. So if you can do like the obvious learnings and a brand new learning that they weren't expecting, that works great. Because if you learn something, we all love surprises and new stuff. So if you just read an email like that from me that delivered on the promise and it was surprising, it was, oh, I wasn't expecting that, then the next time you're probably going to more likely to open another email, because again, you think, oh, I'm probably going to learn something that I wasn't expecting from this one.
Okay, and then and that kind of, while you say that, it kind of touches on some. I know because we're getting short on time, but it touches on something that we spoke about earlier, the AIDA model. What you've mentioned there kind of touches a bit onto the AIDA model. I suppose, would I be right in saying what we're here to talk about today and getting their attention does relate to the AIDA model? And I suppose even
I think so. It's like all these things are kind of fractal, aren't they? In that, firstly, it fits in that it's the A bit of getting attention. But if you think of what we're saying, the A bit of getting attention, you could think of as immediate attention, and the I bit maybe the kind of the short attention, and then the desire may come from the long attention. And I haven't really talked about the call to action side of it, but you could look at it like that. But you could also say every single thing you do as part of that, the AIDA model goes into that. Like in that email, there was attention was from the subject line, interest was from the first paragraph, saying, I had my worst. I'm going to tell you about my worst ever sales meeting. It was truly awful. Hopefully, you can learn something from it. They go, oh, it gets a bit more interest, and so you can apply it at multiple levels. I think so. It definitely fits.
No, I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's like you say, it fits into many different aspects of it, but also how you can actually, I suppose it's about what value you can get from it, because you mentioned call to action there, but sometimes, I mean, I've worked with companies and you look to the website and you think, wow, this is amazing, fantastic landing page, everything looks good, the email sequencing, you think this is great, that you can't fault it, but they need help with the adverts, which is basically what we're here for today, is
get people there.
They couldn't get the attention to get people there, and I suppose from some of the things you've mentioned there, they can take, I suppose, because you can't have it too perfect, because I think the example you gave earlier with regards to your wife, people will be so used to seeing pictures of babies, but they see them all day. That's not different, but it's having that bridge where you said you use the kid with the cartoon kind of thing, and it made it look slightly different, which made more sense because it wasn't like an angry gorilla or a giraffe walking through the tree or a cat video.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that clickbait, but it was somewhere to just enough to make them think, what is that?
You're completely correct. It's still got it. They've still got to look at it and think this is going to be relevant. So if it looks completely irrelevant, they'll filter that out as well. So it has to look relevant. So it was a cartoon of kids, and it was a speech and language conference, so hence the speech bubbles. But it was a cartoon, not a picture, which we normally see. So you need to contrast it. It's challenging. You've got to have a contrast, but still be close enough to what they're expecting for them to know it's relevant. So it's not easy. I mean, that's why people, who are really good at this make a lot of money.
Yeah, I suppose so. So I suppose just talking about what you do. So in terms of getting their attention, I'm guessing some of the things that you do, you help people get attention to their product or service. Do you want to give me a
Um,
little bit about what you do and how you go about it?
That's a really good question. I tend to embed this kind of attention thinking into everything I do. So I have two strands to my business. So one strand that I've done you kind of remember me for, and I've done for decades, is the marketing side, particularly for people who are like consultants and coaches and small businesses doing things for themselves, where they don't have a massive marketing budget, so they can't just use money to get attention by blasting the world with adverts and things, but they've got to be a bit more creative about it. They've got to, and so harnessing it, that these and be more interest in you, and sign up for your emails or whatever it might be. So that's stuff I do over at ianbrodie.com with a kind of a tool I call value-based marketing, where through your marketing deliver value to people, which is kind of in tune with the mindset of my type of people. The other thing I've been doing more recently, and again, attention comes into it, is online courses, in that I've been delivering my stuff through online courses for about a decade or so.
Yeah.
And, as we went into the pandemic, a course became more and more difficult for my people who are consultants and who often did things face to face to deliver their work. So they started asking me about Ian, how have you been doing your online courses? How do you make them, etc. So I started this free resource called the Course Builders Hub, which is where I interview people about their online courses and how they created them and how they market them, so people can learn how to build their own online course. And when I'm advising people on the online course side, obviously you then have to think, well, if someone's going to buy an online course, then they have to notice it in the first place. They have to get interested in it. And then through your marketing, you have to deliver enough value that they keep coming back for more, so that when the time is right, then they'll think of you first when it comes to buy their online course.
Absolutely. And if anybody's interested in that, what's probably the best way to get in touch with you? Is it through the Course Builders?
We might as well start at Course Builders Hub. So go to www.coursebuildershub. You can watch the free videos there, where I'm doing kind of interviews like this, except in my case, it's about people who've built online courses in a whole variety of fields, from branding to writing books to driving lessons, all kind of online courses. That's a Course Builders Hub. You can sign up to get the free kind of guide, the ultimate guide to building your own online course. And through there, you can find me on LinkedIn or my website at ianbrodie.com if you're interested in some of the other stuff I do.
Wow, good stuff. And so what have you got planned for the rest of, I suppose, this post-lockdown world, or what have you got planned for the rest of 2022?
It is two things. One is just really ramping up the Course Builder Hub side, getting more interviews, especially I believe it's worth, and I know you're doing this with your stuff, interviewing a wide variety of people. I think there's lots to learn from lots of different people. If I look at my clients, they're very diverse, and even if it just comes to simple things like marketing, some people are very technical minded and they'd be great at doing kind of Facebook ads and fiddling around with that. Others love doing videos and they'd be much better doing live streaming. Others like to write and they'd be much better blogging or writing on LinkedIn. So there's no one way of doing things, I don't think, for everyone. And that's why I like to interview a wide variety of people on Course Builders Hub and bring in people. I've got people who've grown successful courses through doing YouTube ads. Another guy who did it through, not that YouTube ads, just doing YouTube, having a YouTube channel and doing videos on there. Other people who've set up their own Facebook group and built their course through that. Other people who've been doing advertising. So it's nice to hear from a variety of people. So that's my main focus, is to have a really wide variety of people who've succeeded with online courses that people can learn from. Project 2 is a bit of a secret, but I'm hoping to launch a 30-day challenge type thing in a couple of months' time over on my own site. And it'll be a little bit to do with email and to do with being creative and productive with your marketing and being able to kind of crank out really good, effective marketing very quickly.
So I'll consider that as a bit of an exclusive. So the Ian Brodie 30-day challenge, I might use it as a hook for my email when I send out this podcast.
That won't start for a little bit, but you're the first to hear of it.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. No, it sounds like you've got a pretty busy rest of the year planned. So, anything else that you'd like to mention, Ian? Anything that we think you might have missed? Or
no, that is it. Other than saying thank you, because I've a really good time chatting.
No, I'm
And
honestly real privileged. It was like because I think when I was at that, going back to the event that you were at, I remember signing up for one of your emails because I can't connect with him on LinkedIn. He's a bit high up there, so I can't really connect with
oh,
him. And then like I think it was about a couple of years ago, I got an LinkedIn request, and I was like, God, that's from Ian Brodie, and I was like, wow, that's quite good. It was like quite like a really, it's all that humble side to you. I thought, well, he's a big timer. He's kind of a bit of a digital marketing rock star, but he's still like he still has time for poor little Kaz. And I was like, okay,
oh,
that's quite good. But some really great examples today, which was very useful. And finally, the only thing I would mention is you were just mentioning then that how different people are like different things. I've noticed that, like I do digital marketing training, and you see different people, and some of them are like entry level, and then they're not sure what they want to do. But just like you said, midway through the course, you think they'll be good to run Facebook ads. They love
mm,
SEO. They'd be good at writing copy, and they kind of find it within themselves. And I think you're absolutely right. So if you're in that stage of your life where you want to get into digital marketing or you're doing it, don't feel like you have to specialize from day one. See
mm.
how you go, and you'll naturally, I suppose, your natural abilities will find a bit of an interest in certain aspects.
You have to try a few things. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a challenge. I would give the same advice to, say, a small business owner who wanted to know what the best marketing for them is. And there's like a theoretical best marketing, the
Yeah.
but if you don't enjoy it, you won't, and you don't, and you're not good at it, you won't do it, and it's not best. You've got to find something you not only that works, but that you're quite good at and you enjoy doing, so you keep it up. Because marketing only works if you keep doing it. And I think the challenge is you have to try a few things, but you can't do 10 things at once. Nobody has the capacity for that. So I always tend to advise people, have one core thing you're doing that seems to work for you now, and try out a new thing on the side. And if that new thing turns out to be better than the thing you're doing right now, migrate to it. And then when you
Yeah.
got that going, and you like driving a car, when you're comfortable with it and you're doing it, try another little thing on the side just to see if that
Oh.
works. But what you don't want to do is try 10 things at once, and because you'll just fall apart and not do any of them well.
No, I think that's a really good advice to almost end on. If you're going to do something, do it well, and then once you are doing it very well, then you can move on to other things. But once again, thank you very much for your time, Ian. Really, really appreciate it. Take care,
My
and
pleasure.
speak to you soon. See you later.
You've been watching the Kaz Lalji Digital Marketing Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe to learn about our latest content.